Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, listen, while we've all been freaking out about the pistol brace rule, let us not forget that your state legislature is hard at work trying to disarm each and every one of you lawful and responsible gun owners here in the state of Washington. So this is going to be a video for the hometown crowd. This is for my Washington viewers. But we had some significant testimony taken today on several House bills that will absolutely affect the future of your Second Amendment rights here in the state of Washington. So let's jump right into it. I broke it all down. We're going to have a little armchair quarterbacking, but let's get you all up to speed about Washington citizens speak out on gun control. But is anybody listening? Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a longer video. I'm going to try to get right to it. Otherwise, this thing's going to take 30 minutes, but there is a lot to cover here. As we know, today, January 17th, 2023, you'll probably be getting this video the morning of the 18th. However, we had significant developments in the fact that the House Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee down in Olympia took testimony today on multiple House bills that will significantly affect the future of your Second Amendment rights. Now, we'd already kind of warned you about this. We did a video here. We did a lot of other things, and there was a lot of people in the 2A community that were out there publicizing this, and we ended up with an hour and a half to basically hear testimony, both pro and con, on 4 separate House bills. So I can assure you that 99% of the testimony is going to be submitted in writing, and candidly, I have not had a chance to review that yet. However, what I have had a chance to do was either watch the testimony live in part, or what I did miss, because I did have to run a law practice today, is I went back, I watched it on replay, I downloaded the whole thing, I cut it all up, and I'm going to give you guys the highlights of what happened today so you can understand not only what's going on in Olympia, but you really need to understand where some of these state legislators are coming from. Because when you hear them ask very common sense questions, you really got to pay attention to their answers. Okay, now, I will be referring to my notes here. I did take notes of the whole scripted out, so if I'm looking down, I apologize. Normally, I do like to connect with all of you lawful and responsible gun owners, but I also do want to know what the hell I'm talking about this evening, okay? We're doing this one a little bit on the fly. First up on the docket, and I'm glad this one was first, because all of you out there, you're not paying enough attention to this bill, okay? You're all freaking out about the assault weapon ban. You're all freaking out about the pre-purchasing license requirements. Good freakouts, by the way, but here's the deal. House Bill 1178, which would demolish, completely do away with state preemption, is absolutely probably the most dangerous piece of legislation kicking around in Olympia this year. Now, let's get it introduced by the sponsor, of course, and that is Representative David Hackney.
To testify in support of HB 1178, which repeals the statute, which preempts local jurisdictions from enacting laws regarding firearms. And the reason for this is simple. One size fits all doesn't necessarily work. And local jurisdictions should have the authority to adopt the kind of gun regulations that are appropriate for their community. There are in South King County, where the 11th district where it exists, we are facing a surge of gun violence. In fact, we experience 70% of all the gun violence in King County. It should be appropriate for those communities to make decisions for themselves on the kind of gun regulations that make sense for them. And we shouldn't have to then impose that on other areas of the state that are not facing a surge in gun violence. So the preemption by the state of gun laws actually causes harm to communities that don't have the ability to adopt the kind of laws that make sense for them.
Well, you see, Representative Hackney, when it comes to constitutional rights, actually when it comes to inalienable rights that our Creator gave us, that the Constitution guarantees cannot be taken from us by government, you see, one size fits all is exactly what was intended and exactly what occurs here. Now, with that in mind, along comes a question from Representative Skylar Rude, 16th District over there in the Walla Walla area, and I want you to listen to the question, and then I want you to listen to Representative Hackney's answer, because I think this really tells you what's going on here.
I'm just curious what your thoughts are on potential difficulties of a a firearm owner, and creating kind of a patchwork of laws around the state, and if that might create any concern about compliance difficulties.
Thank you for that question. I believe that if you take the responsibility of having a firearm, then you should take also the additional responsibility of understanding the local laws. And again, although there may be some inconvenience by not being able to carry your firearm or in the same manner in every jurisdiction, I think the need for local jurisdictions to adopt firearm laws that are applicable to the circumstances they're facing outweighs that concern.
So you see, because you choose to exercise it, right, there is all of this great level of responsibility that comes with it for you to know the hodgepodge of laws that will change as frequently as so does the zip code. Now, here's the thing. I think we all agree that responsible gun ownership is the only type of gun ownership. We here at Washington Gun Law preach nothing but lawful and responsible gun ownership. But we are allowed to be lawful and responsible gun owners when there are lawful or responsible gun laws, you see, and the ability to have predictable gun laws so that our behavior is consistent throughout the state of Washington is exactly what allows each and every one of us to be a lawful and responsible gun owner. But I digress. Now, along comes the next question, and of course, this one from absolutely the premier Second Amendment warrior. And if you guys do not know who Representative Jim Walsh is, it's time to get to know this guy, okay? Nobody has been in Olympia fighting for your Second Amendment rights, and candidly, all of your civil rights, more viciously than Representative Jim Walsh. This guy is an absolute warrior for your rights. Along comes his question. I want you to pay attention to the question, and I want you to pay attention to the answer.
The concept behind the existing statute in these matters is that gun rights are not like other rights. They're foundational and essential, and that it's important for policy to be consistent across the state. If this bill passes, is there a risk that local jurisdictions will want to extend this concept to more strict restrictions and local policies on other foundational rights, like the right to peaceably assemble for the common good and the right to not be disturbed in your personal affairs? Do you see that it could drift that direction?
I don't see it as a slippery slope, but I do see the Constitution is not a suicide pact. It's a balancing act. We constantly have to balance the rights of people that are enforcing their constitutional protections against the others. And so even with the Second Amendment is broad enough to allow for reasonable gun regulations, particularly to protect communities that are under a siege of gun violence and crime.
Okay, and then after that, we, of course, then get to the public testimony. And one of the things we need to understand about public testimony is that those in favor of these gun control bills will parade the same people with the same horror stories out. Now, I do not mean to discredit the horrific events that these people had to endure and the trauma that they live with today. And I think that all of us in the lawful and responsible gun owning community need to recognize that for those very small number of people that have been directly affected by gun violence, there really is no change in them. It is an emotional reaction to that, and it is what it is. The problem is that spreads like a cancer into legislation. That is how we end up with bills that are based on emotion, not based on common sense, not based on constitutional standards, okay? So testifying in favor of this bill was Breanne Biggs, the Spokane City Council member, Craig Reynolds, who told this horrific story about a high school buddy of his, God knows how many years ago, tragically accidentally shooting himself, and Marisha Harrell of the city of Seattle, interesting last name there, I should point out, who of course explained that the city of Seattle would love the opportunity to make its own gun laws. I bet they would. Now, testifying in opposition to the bill was Brian Keelan of the Washington State Rifle and Pistol Association, Jennifer Belmore Tamiez, which was not only a concerned citizen, but I also believe a firearm instructor. And then I want you to pay attention to this gentleman right here, John Knowles, your new Spokane County Sheriff. Now, listen, Spokane County, your sheriffs the last couple of years have done you proud, because last year, your outgoing sheriff, Ozzie Knezevich, testified against a couple of these bills and did a fantastic job. Well, I want to report to you that your new sheriff, well, let me just roll the tape.
The preemption law here in Washington State is a model for at least 20 other states throughout the United States because it is so effective and works so well. By repealing this law, it will create criminals out of otherwise law-abiding, tax-paying citizens who are just exercising their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. I ask you to reject House Bill 1178 and not create criminals out of our good citizens. Thank you.
Okay, so that is House Bill 1178. And people, you need to start paying more and more attention to this. This bill has a devastating impact. If you probably live somewhere around the Tri-Cities or Cle Elum, Yakima, a place like that where you can live freer like an American, you're probably not as freaked out about this bill. However, let me remind you that you will need to travel either for business or pleasure somewhere inside of the state of Washington, many of you having to come to the Puget Sound region. And I know what many of you think when you have to do that, okay? Do you really want the city of Seattle? Do you really want King County, city of Tacoma, Snohomish County, city of Edmonds, already got blown up on this stuff before? Do you really want them making their own gun laws? Okay, next up on the docket was House Bill 1240, better known as the Assault Weapon Ban of 2023. Yes, there is no terminology known as an assault weapon, but this bill, if passed into legislation, would certainly create one. Now, let's get the bill introduced by Representative Strom Peterson. Now, I apologize for the volume here. I don't know if Representative Peterson's microphone was not working. It appeared to be working for everybody else that sat in that chair, or if he's just a very soft-spoken gentleman. I'm going to try to edit the audio. Hopefully you understand. But without further ado, Representative Peterson to introduce the bill.
This bill is complicated, yes, but what it boils down to for me is that this bill is about a very long list of names. A long list of names that I won't read to you because it goes back 4 decades, but some of the incidences where these names are listed would be Sandy Hook Elementary School. Of course, most recently, Uvalde, Texas, Buffalo, New York. But also right here in my community in Mukilteo, Washington, where 8 years ago, just almost 8 years ago, a young man legally purchased an AR-15, shot up a house party, killing Anna, Jake, and Jordan, injuring Will. The only reason there isn't a longer list of names from Mukilteo is because the young man who purchased the weapon didn't really know how to use it, and the gun jammed. With these assault weapons, yes, there are other guns that create death and tragedy in communities, and certainly even other weapons that do the same. But the percentage of mass shootings that are used by these weapons of war is something that we here in the state of Washington can do something about. And I think this bill strikes that right balance. This is not a bill about going after people's guns. This is a bill about trying to just limit the continuing purchase and expansion of the use of these weapons in our state.
Okay, and then of course there are questions. You know, he is the lead sponsor of the bill, so does anybody have a question that's in the committee? Oh, of course. Yeah, the ranking minority member, Representative Jim Walsh.
And the Bruin decision, the U.S. Supreme Court said that 2-part balancing test has 1 part too many and has turned away analogous laws like this. How do you think this proposal squares with that Bruin decision?
And I want you to listen to the brilliant answer that's coming up here, okay?
I'm certainly not a constitutional attorney, nor an attorney at all. But I believe in the legal minds that helped craft this in the Attorney General's office. I believe it's on sound constitutional footing. I think other similar laws across the country have been upheld in courts, and I think that is the process that we can go through. Will there be a challenge? Absolutely, and I welcome that challenge. And I think that is one of the things that we get to do in state government is, you know, we are the petri dish of discovering these laws, and this is, I think, an honest attempt to see if we can, in fact, constitutionally stem the tide of gun violence.
Okay, next up was the public testimony on House Bill 1240. And of course, again, we have to parade all the horror stories out, including this woman, AnneMarie Parsons, who, again, do not mean to discredit anything that she's saying here. Her family has been the victim of gun violence. But I want you to understand what the sound reasoning is, or what they claim their sound reasoning is.
But I believe everyone in this room knows exactly what our U.S. Constitution and our amendments say about assault weapons. Nothing. And that is because our founding fathers had no way of knowing what kind of weapons mankind would eventually create.
Now, Ms. Parsons, I mean no disrespect, and I really, really do feel terrible for the tragedy that you and your family has had to endure. However, you see, when they wrote the First Amendment, they didn't really think there'd be a thing called the internet. They really didn't think there'd be a thing called Twitter. They didn't really think there'd be a thing called Facebook or anything like that. Okay? When they wrote the Fourth Amendment and kept us to be free from searches and seizures, they didn't really think about wiretaps. They really didn't think about thermal imaging. They didn't really think about X-raying. But you know what? In both instances, those constitutional amendments continue to protect those activities. Certainly at the time that they created the freedom of religion, there were far fewer religions at that time when the First Amendment was adopted than there are today. And yet every American gets to enjoy whatever religion they want to, because that is how the First Amendment works. So I recognize the emotional strain that this has taken on you, but understand that the Constitution unfortunately does not care about people's feelings. Next up, of course, testifying against it was Robert Shentrup. His sister, unfortunately, was killed in a terrible gun violence incident, mass shooting in Florida. He testified and has testified for several years now. After that, of course, was the governor's safety officer, Barbara Serrano, formerly of the Seattle City Attorney's Office, who, of course, was in absolute support of this bill. Now, just for the record, Barbara Serrano used to be a Seattle City attorney, and I tried a case against her. And Barbara, if you're watching this, you know you got your ass kicked in that case. I absolutely kicked her ass in a trial, case that she should have never lost. So good on you, Barb Serrano. And then, of course, next up was the Attorney General's office. So now we've already had the governor speak in favor of this through one of his talking heads. So now Attorney General Ferguson, through Kristen Benesky, who has testified in the past on these bills, has to step up and say the following.
After a tragic shooting in Mukilteo in 2016 and a promise to parents, Attorney General Ferguson has proposed this bill every session since. And meanwhile, the mass shootings haven't stopped. In fact, these horrible incidents have become commonplace. This is the 7th session in which Attorney General Ferguson has requested this bill, because exponentially deadly military-style weapons don't belong on the streets. Banning their sale will not make anyone less able to defend themselves, nor will it make criminals out of law-abiding citizens, but it will reduce access to the deadliest weapons used over and over again in the mass shootings that now plague our country. Multiple states have adopted similar legislation banning these weapons or their sale. Multiple federal courts have upheld those laws, and the Supreme Court has allowed those decisions to stand. And just last year, in the Bruin decision, the Supreme Court reiterated its previous holdings that the Second Amendment is not unlimited, and that the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever. The time to ban assault weapons in Washington is now. Thank you for the opportunity to address this important issue.
And, of course, that last bit there is a little bit disingenuous and considerably misleading. Now, testifying against the bill was Dan Mitchell of Sporting Systems out of Vancouver, Washington. For those of you who don't know Dan, you better get to know him. This guy is an absolute warrior, always fighting for your Second Amendment rights. Now, there was a representative from Aero Precision, and unbeknownst to us, Aero Precision is actually the largest single employer in the city of Lakewood. And of course, if this bill passes, Aero Precision is clearly going to have to move their manufacturing not only outside of Lakewood, but outside of the state altogether. And that means the largest single employer inside that city will be leaving thanks to this legislation. Now, in addition to that, there was also testimony by Robin Bell of Sharpshooting Indoor Range. And then finally, and our first appearance of the day, the founder of the Conservative Ladies of Washington, Miss Julie Barrett, and this is what she had to say.
The Department of Justice reported that 88.8% of gun violence is caused by people who are possessing firearms illegally. Creating a new law would not make these criminals compliant, but will penalize law-abiding citizens. This, quote, assault weapons ban and the list of firearms it includes would not have any reduction on the gun violence in Washington. In fact, since the passage of the ban on the high-capacity magazines last session, we have seen an increase in gun violence across our state. Common sense and the data show us that violent criminals are unchanged by gun control legislation. Instead of holding criminals accountable, we pass laws like this, making up new terms like assault weapons. A man was attacked in Seattle on Friday, receiving life-threatening injuries from a hammer. That's an assault weapon too. This is a bill to make people feel good, to make people feel like you're solving the gun violence problem, and all this bill does is infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens.
And you just love arguments that come out with really objective facts like that. Julie, I don't know who's teaching your facts, but way to use them. Now, there was more public testimony, including Amy Strahan, who has testified also every year. Her son, unfortunately, was killed in a mass shooting. Now, testifying in opposition to this was Jane Milhorms, who's a firearms instructor, and Troy Nichols of National Shooting Sports. And I really think that Mr. Nichols, I think, sums this up best right here.
40. I think if you look at the intent section of this bill, its general intent is to prevent gun violence, mass shootings. I don't think that that's a goal that anybody in this room.
And then we get to hear from Abaheen Klein, who is the local NRA attorney here in the state of Washington. And it is nice to hear from the NRA once in a while beyond your monthly mailer or phone calls to give them more money. Ms. Klein, however, did make some really, really good points, including the following.
Bruin test. And there are currently at least 20 active court cases challenging similar assault weapon bans in this country, all facing the new Bruin test. To close, if constitutionality is in the eye of the beholder, at least the gun lobby has the Constitution and precedent on our side. Thank you.
Okay, and then last but certainly not least, House Bill 1143 and House Bill 1144. Now, this is the bill that has some also lengthening out of statutory waiting periods, but the big thing here, the big thing is a pre-purchasing licensing requirement, or essentially a license to go exercise a constitutional right. Now, the drafter of this statute, Miss Liz Berry, Representative Liz Berry, could not be there. She was chairing another committee, probably figuring out some other ways to strip you of your constitutional rights. So Representative Amy Wallen, who is a co-sponsor of the bill, was there on her behalf. So let's listen to how she introduces House Bill 1143 and House Bill 1144.
She says this: we require training and a license to drive a car or go fishing. It's just common sense to require a license for purchasing a firearm. 16 states have licensing and permitting laws, including 10 states with permit systems similar to what we're trying to create here. Permit to purchase helps to make sure that guns are only purchased by responsible individuals by requiring an identity verification, completed background check, and safety training. Requiring basic training on how to handle, load, shoot, and store a gun makes everyone safer, and responsible gun owners agree. A 10-day waiting period ensures that there's sufficient time to complete a background check, and for persons in crisis, creates a buffer between that crisis and having a firearm. This time can save lives. And gives the chance for seeking help. I urge your support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and even though he admits that he's just going to go ahead and toss a softball and not really dig in, once again, to the rescue, Representative Jim Walsh with a really good question, and then we're going to listen to a really, really poor answer.
I know you're pinch hitting, so I'm not going to drill into the details of terribly technical matters, but let's do a thought experiment for these proposals, these two bills. The comparison's been made in that statement to a fishing license or driver's license, which of course are not specifically protected under the state constitution or federal constitution. Voting is specifically protected under the state constitution and federal constitution. Would it be, the logic of this bill suggests we can require a training and a permit to exercise the constitutionally protected right to keep and bear firearms following the logic of these bills, would it be reasonable to request training and a permit to vote?
Thank you for the question. I think this is the fundamental, you get to the crux of the question, right? I think I read that when the Constitution was crafted, that it took 1 minute and 42 seconds to reload a musket. And so we're in a place where what we think of as constitutionally protected activity has far outstripped the vision of our founding fathers. And it is reasonable to, in this day and age, to regulate dangerous objects. And so we have to balance rights with responsibilities. And so I do think we need to regulate voting as well and balance rights and responsibilities there too. But it's an excellent question. Thank you, Representative Walsh.
And once again, we're getting to this whole, well, when they drafted the Second Amendment, we were only dealing with muskets, and now we're dealing with semi-automatic rifles. Just like when, when they drafted the First Amendment, they were only dealing with, hemp paper and a quill and an ink well, right? That's all we were dealing with. That's the freaking form of communication. You wanted to get a message to someone, you had to write it on paper, okay, put it on a dude with a horse and take it somewhere. God only knows how long, if the dude even made it there, okay? That's how you got messages to people, all right? Does the First Amendment apply to modern communication like it did then? It most certainly does. Hey, I can list a lot of religions that did not exist at the time that the First Amendment was ratified. However, guess what? The reason all of those religions exist today, that's because the First Amendment guarantees that they do get to survive. So these arguments, with all due respect to the people that make them, just don't add up, do they? Now, public testimony got underway, and it included Judy Wallace, who was in favor of this. Now, she told a horrible story about her husband's suicide, and it was really a terrible story. And then, of course, that was followed up by another horror story. That's from Tahana Salvadalena, and she told a horrible story about her grandpa killing her grandma. Now, how House Bill 1143 or House Bill 1144 would have stopped or prevented this tragedy, I have no idea. They never connected those dots. Now, testifying against this legislation was Mark Kreider, Sheriff of Walla Walla County. And Sheriff, you are a sharp dude because he knows exactly what's going on. Listen to the issue that he brought up about 1143 and 1144.
I'm going to take this a little bit different direction than what you've already heard from, is in looking at the overall 1143 and 1144, I'm going to voice my opposition to these. Number one, because I think they create a state registry and database of gun owners. And I don't think the government has any purview to all of my personally identifiable information just because I'm exercising one of my constitutionally given rights.
And then also testifying against it was Dan Mitchell again from Shooting Sports and Julie Barrett. And I want you to listen to Julie Barrett because she comes at this one with an entirely different angle than she did in her testimony on the other bill. But I think this is a really worthwhile point. Those of you who are sitting on the fence, I don't know where I think on this. This is a point you need to consider.
And in doing so, would disproportionately impact the groups of people this bill claims to support. As a domestic violence survivor myself and a mom of 4 who spent 10 years as a single mother with limited financial resources, this bill is particularly troubling because I know that law-abiding mothers like myself and people in marginalized communities will be unable to obtain a firearm for self-defense purposes and practice their Second Amendment rights due to the additional time, money, and travel this bill would create.
And I think that that is a really, really good point that I want all of you to consider, which is many of these gun laws actually affect, obviously, lawful and responsible gun owners, but that includes all of the lawful and responsible gun owners in marginalized communities who candidly probably need the ability to preserve themselves more than just about anybody else. Listen, that is a short summary. I know this is a long video. Hopefully you guys can skip around, get to the parts that you want to see. Now, we're going to have a lot more videos because there's a lot more legislation and a lot more things happening in Olympia. In the meantime, you guys know the drill now. If you got any questions about this or anything else about what's left of your Second Amendment rights, you can always contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com, or you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. In the meantime, let's remember, part of being a lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching and stay safe.